The rain was coming down in sheets when a 5-year-old boy, tears streaming down his bruised face, slammed into the legs of the most dangerous man in Boston. Guns were drawn in a heartbeat. Heavy-shouldered bodyguards froze, their hands hovering over concealed holsters. Breath hitched in the throats of the few bystanders on the street. You don't touch Leo Moretti and live to tell the tale. But instead of signaling his men to strike, the ruthless syndicate boss knelt onto the dirty, puddle-soaked asphalt, letting the mud ruin his bespoke suit. He looked into the trembling child's eyes, gently wiped a tear from his cheek with a scarred thumb, and whispered words that would unravel an entire criminal empire. "Who hurt you, little one? And where is your mother?" The wind howling off Boston Harbor felt like shards of ice, but Clara Hayes barely registered the cold. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was running. She had been running for what felt like her entire life, but tonight the chase was terrifyingly literal. Her ex-husband, Thomas Mitchell, had finally crossed the last irreversible line. A mid-level grifter with a gambling addiction that rivaled his love for cheap bourbon, Thomas had always been bad news. But earlier that evening, Clara had overheard him on a burner phone in their cramped, mildew-scented apartment. He wasn't just placing bets anymore. He was trading collateral to clear a massive, insurmountable debt. And the collateral he had offered was Clara and their 5-year-old son, Oliver. Clara hadn't waited to pack bags. She had grabbed Oliver, her worn leather purse, and bolted out the fire escape just as heavy boots began kicking at their front door. Now, she was navigating the labyrinthine alleys of the North End, the heavy rain blurring the neon signs of Italian restaurants and dive bars. She gripped Oliver's tiny hand with desperate strength. The boy was crying silently, his small chest heaving with exhaustion. He had tripped a block ago, scraping his knee, but Clara couldn't afford to stop. "Keep up, Ollie, please," she begged, her voice cracking over the roar of a passing elevated train. "Just a little further." She needed to get to North Station. She needed to disappear. But as they rounded the corner of Hanover Street, a group of rowdy, intoxicated tourists pushed aggressively out of a tavern, colliding with them. The sudden impact knocked the breath out of Clara. Her grip slipped. The wet, freezing rain made everything slick, and in a fraction of a second, Oliver's small hand was torn from hers. "Oliver!" Clara screamed, fighting against the tide of stumbling bodies. "Oliver!" Panic, absolute and blinding, seized her. She shoved past a laughing man in a trench coat, her eyes scanning the sea of umbrellas and dark coats. A few yards away, disoriented and terrified by the noise and his mother's sudden absence, little Oliver ran blindly down the sidewalk. He couldn't see through the dense curtain of rain and tears. He just kept his small legs moving, trying to escape the loud voices. He didn't see the sleek, armored black SUV idling by the curb. He didn't see the massive men in tailored dark suits forming a protective perimeter outside the private entrance of Il Destino, the most exclusive and notorious social club in the city. And he certainly didn't see the tall, imposing figure stepping out from beneath the club's heavy velvet awning. Oliver ran headfirst into a solid wall of muscle and wool. The impact sent the boy tumbling backward, landing hard on his backside in a deep, icy puddle. Instantly, the atmosphere on the street shifted. The ambient noise of the city seemed to get sucked into a vacuum. 3 of the men in suits moved with terrifying synchronization, their hands diving inside their jackets. "Hold." The command was spoken softly, yet it carried over the drumming rain with absolute authority. Leo Moretti looked down. At 34, Leo was the undisputed head of the Moretti syndicate. He was a man who traded in fear, a strategist who had ruthlessly consolidated power in the Northeast by eliminating his rivals with cold, calculated precision. His face, sharp and handsome, was usually a mask of impenetrable stone. His dark eyes, which had watched men beg for their lives without a flicker of empathy, now stared at the small, soaked mass of a crying child. Silvio, Leo's right-hand man, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the street for an assassin. "Boss, step back. Could be a distraction." Leo ignored him. He didn't step back. Instead, something uncharacteristic, something fundamentally alien to the man he had become, compelled him forward. The child was sobbing, clutching a bruised elbow, looking up at the towering men with sheer terror. Slowly, deliberately, Leo crouched down. The pristine fabric of his trousers absorbed the dirty water of the street, a detail that made Silvio visibly twitch. Leo ignored the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He reached out a large hand, a hand scarred by a decade of violence, and held it palm up, a gesture of peace. "Are you lost, kid?" Leo's voice was a low rumble, devoid of its usual icy edge. Oliver sniffled, wiping his nose with a wet sleeve. He looked at the giant man. There was something in Leo's eyes, a strange, protective gravity that made the child stop crying. I lost my mum. We'll find her," Leo stated. It wasn't a comfort, it was a vow. He reached out and gently tilted the boy's chin. That's when he saw it. The fading, yellowish bruise on the boy's cheekbone and the fresh scrape on his elbow. The boy was shivering violently. Leo's jaw clenched. He took off his heavy cashmere overcoat and wrapped it around the tiny boy. The coat swallowed Oliver whole. At that exact moment, a hysterical scream tore through the rain. "Get away from him!" Clara burst through the perimeter of guards, driven by a primal, maternal fury that overrode any sense of self-preservation. She didn't care that these men looked like they could kill her with a thought. She lunged, grabbing Oliver and yanking him against her chest, shielding him with her own body. She glared up at the man crouching before her, her chest heaving. "Don't you touch my son." Leo slowly stood up, towering over her. His men closed in, a circle of lethal intent tightening around Clara. But Leo raised a hand, stopping them dead. His dark, analytical gaze swept over Clara. He took in her soaked, cheap clothes, her terrified but defiant eyes, and the unmistakable look of a hunted animal. "You're his mother," Leo stated, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. There was something familiar about her. A photograph he had seen on a desk, a file passed to him by his accountant. "Yes," Clara gasped, backing up, though the guards blocked her escape. "We're leaving. We don't want any trouble." "It's a little too late for that," Leo said softly. "You're Thomas Mitchell's wife. Clara, isn't it?" Clara's blood ran cold. The freezing rain suddenly felt like nothing compared to the ice in her veins. How did this man know her name? How did he know Thomas? "Ex-wife," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know who you are, but whatever Thomas has done, it has nothing to do with us. We haven't seen him." Silvio leaned in, whispering in Leo's ear. "Boss, Mitchell is the one who owes us the $500,000. The one who lost the ledger." Leo didn't break eye contact with Clara. He saw the genuine terror in her eyes, but also the fierce, unyielding grip she had on her son. Thomas Mitchell had stolen from the Moretti family. He had promised to pay his debt by turning over his assets. Leo hadn't realized until this exact second that the assets Mitchell had tried to sell to a rival trafficker were his own flesh and blood. Leo looked from Clara's desperate face to the boy swallowed in his cashmere coat. The syndicate demanded blood for unpaid debts. The rules of his world dictated that he use these two as leverage, or worse, make an example of them. Instead, Leo did something that shocked his men to their core. "Open the car," Leo commanded Silvio. "Boss?" Silvio balked. "Open the damn car, Silvio," Leo growled, his tone brooking no argument. He looked back at Clara, stepping into her space, his presence suffocatingly powerful. "The men your ex-husband sold you to are 3 blocks away, tearing apart every alley looking for you. If you walk away from me right now, they will find you, and they will not be as polite as I am." Clara stared at him, horror dawning on her. Sold us? Get in the car, Clara," Leo said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding whisper. "I am your only way out of this city alive." The interior of the SUV smelled of expensive leather, faint cologne, and ozone. It was eerily quiet, the thick armored glass completely deadening the roar of the storm outside. Clara sat rigidly in the plush back seat, clutching Oliver so tightly he let out a small squeak of protest. She immediately loosened her grip, burying her face in his wet hair. Leo Moretti sat across from them, watching her with an unreadable expression. In the confined space of the vehicle, his presence was overwhelming. He emanated a dangerous calm, like a predator that had already caught its prey and was deciding what to do with it. "Take off his wet shoes," Leo suddenly said, breaking the oppressive silence. Clara flinched. "Excuse me? The boy is freezing." "Take off his wet shoes," Leo repeated, gesturing to a compartment in the console. "There are dry towels in there." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. Was this a trap? Was he trying to get her to lower her guard? But Oliver's teeth were chattering audibly. With shaking hands, she opened the compartment, pulled out a thick, heated towel, and began drying Oliver's hair. She unlaced his soaked sneakers, her hands fumbling awkwardly under Leo's intense scrutiny. "What do you want with us?" Clara finally asked, her voice tight with suppressed panic. "Thomas has nothing. We have nothing. I work double shifts at a clinic just to feed him." Leo poured a glass of bottled water from a small built-in fridge and offered it to her. She refused to take it. He set it on the console between them. "Thomas Mitchell owes my organization $500,000, Leo said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "More importantly, he stole a ledger from one of my accountants, a book containing names, routes, and financial structures that, if handed to the federal government or my rivals, could cause a lot of inconvenience." Clara shook her head rapidly. "I don't know anything about a ledger. Thomas hasn't lived with us for 2 years. He showed up tonight high out of his mind, screaming about needing collateral. That's when I ran." "I know," Leo said softly. "My men have been tracking him. We intercepted communications between Thomas and the Romano family. The Romanos are the ones hunting you tonight. Thomas offered them the ledger, and to sweeten the deal and clear his personal gambling debts with them, he gave them your address." Clara felt the remaining color drain from her face. The nausea was sudden and violent. She pulled Oliver closer, burying a sob in her chest. The monster she had married had actually tried to sell his own son to the Mafia. "Why did you stop?" she whispered, looking up at Leo. "You're one of them. You're a boss. Why didn't you just let the Romanos take us, or take us yourself and torture me for the ledger?" Leo's dark eyes shifted to Oliver. The boy had found a small, wrapped biscotti in the pocket of Leo's coat and was currently struggling to open the plastic wrapper. Leo reached over, easily tore the plastic with his thumb, and handed the cookie back to the boy. "Thank you, mister," Oliver mumbled, taking a bite. "You're welcome, Oliver," Leo replied, his voice softening imperceptibly. He looked back at Clara. "I'm a businessman, Clara. I'm a lot of terrible things. But I do not trade in women and children, and I do not let filth like the Romanos operate in my city. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Are we prisoners?" "You are my guests," Leo corrected smoothly. "Until I find Thomas and retrieve my property, the Romanos will continue to look for you. They believe you know where the ledger is. As long as you are with me, they cannot touch you." "And after?" Leo leaned back into the shadows of his seat, his sharp jawline illuminated briefly by passing streetlights. "After we will see." The drive felt like an eternity. They left the city limits, the dense urban sprawl giving way to winding, tree-lined roads. Clara watched the GPS on the driver's dashboard, realizing they were heading toward Weston, an area known for sprawling, secluded estates. The SUV finally turned onto a private, unmarked road. Heavy iron gates swung open automatically, revealing a massive, stone-clad mansion, sitting on acres of manicured, albeit rain-swept, grounds. The property was heavily fortified. Clara saw men patrolling the perimeter with dogs, their silhouettes dark against the floodlights. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. The vehicle pulled under a grand portico, and the driver immediately opened the door. Silvio was there, holding a massive umbrella. "Inside," Leo ordered, stepping out. Clara carried Oliver, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by the trauma of the night. She followed Leo through massive oak doors into a foyer that looked like it belonged in a European palace. Marble floors, a sweeping double staircase, and a massive chandelier dripping with crystal. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. An older woman in a neat grey dress hurried forward. "Maria," Leo said, shedding his ruined suit jacket. "Take Mrs. Mitchell and her son to the East Wing, the Blue Suite. Have clothes brought up for them, and bring them some hot food." "Right away, Mr. Moretti," Maria said, her eyes softening as she looked at the sleeping boy. "Please follow me, Mum." Clara hesitated, looking at Leo. I need to contact my work. My landlord." "No phones," Leo said firmly, his eyes turning cold again. "No contact with the outside world. If you make a call, the Romanos will trace it. You are invisible now." "I can't just vanish," Clara argued, desperation flaring again. "I have a life." Leo stepped closer, his height forcing her to look up. "The life you had ended the moment Thomas sold you." "You are in my world now, Clara. The rules are different here. Obey them, and you and your son will be safe. Defy me, and I won't be able to protect you from what comes next." He didn't wait for her to respond. He turned on his heel and walked toward a set of heavy mahogany doors, Silvio trailing behind him like a shadow. Clara stood in the grand foyer, holding her sleeping child, realizing that she had just traded a monster she knew for a devil she didn't. The Blue Suite in the East Wing was larger than Clara's entire apartment. It featured a massive king-sized bed, a separate sitting area with plush velvet couches, and a bathroom entirely clad in white marble. True to his word, Maria had provided dry, surprisingly high-end clothes. A soft cashmere sweater and silk lounge pants for Clara, and a pair of oversized pajamas for Oliver that he had to roll up at the ankles. A tray of hot food, roasted chicken, vegetables and fresh bread, had been devoured by the two of them. Now, Oliver was fast asleep in the center of the massive bed, clutching a feather pillow. Clara couldn't sleep. She paced the length of the room, her bare feet silent on the thick Persian rug. She had checked the windows. They were locked, and given the thickness of the glass, she suspected they were bulletproof. She was in a gilded cage. Downstairs, in his dimly lit study, Leo Moretti poured himself a glass of scotch. He didn't sit behind his desk. He stood by the window, watching the rain batter the glass. Silvio sat on a leather sofa, reviewing a tablet. "Boss, the men swept the north end." "No sign of Mitchell. The Romanos pulled back once they realized we had boots on the ground, but they left a mess. 2 of our dealers were found beaten to a pulp in an alley. Leo took a slow sip of the amber liquid. They're getting bold. Sal Romano thinks he can muscle into my territory just because he got a tip from a desperate junkie. What about the woman? Silvio asked, glancing up. She's a liability, Leo. If the commission finds out you're harboring a civilian, especially the wife of a man who stole from us— Ex-wife, Leo corrected sharply, and she is leverage. If Mitchell is hiding, knowing we have his family might flush him out. Silvio frowned. With all due respect, boss, Thomas Mitchell sold them for a clean slate and a fix. He doesn't give a damn about them. He's not going to come out of hiding for her. Leo stared out into the dark. Silvio was right. Men like Thomas didn't experience redemption. But there was another reason Leo had brought her here. A reason he wasn't entirely willing to admit to himself. The look in Clara's eyes when she threw herself in front of her son, that raw, sacrificial love. It had struck a chord deep within him, vibrating against memories he had long buried. "Keep her here," Leo ordered. "Double the guard on the east wing. And Silvio, find out everything there is to know about her. Her job, her history, everything." "Done," Silvio said, standing up. He paused at the door. "Boss, you're playing a dangerous game. Keeping them here makes it personal." "I decide what's personal, Silvio," Leo said, his voice a low warning. The next 3 days blurred into a surreal routine for Clara. She and Oliver were confined to the estate, though they were allowed to roam the expansive house and the enclosed back gardens, always under the watchful eye of armed men. Oliver, remarkably resilient as only a child could be, had adapted quickly. He thought the massive house was a castle. He spent hours in the library, marveling at the thousands of books or watching the large koi fish in the indoor conservatory pond. Clara, however, was a bundle of raw nerves. She jumped at every sound. She constantly watched the guards, trying to memorize their rotations, though she knew escaping was impossible. Her interactions with Leo were brief but intense. They usually happened in the evenings. He would return from the city, looking exhausted, the scent of smoke and cold air clinging to him. They would cross paths in the grand hallways, or he would join her and Oliver briefly in the conservatory. On the 4th evening, Clara was sitting at the grand piano in the music room. She hadn't played in years, not since before she met Thomas, but the sheer beauty of the Steinway had drawn her in. She was tentatively playing a Chopin nocturne, the melancholic notes echoing in the large room. She didn't hear him enter. "You play well," a deep voice resonated behind her. Clara gasped, her hands crashing against the keys in a discordant jumble. She spun around to find Leo standing in the doorway. He had shed his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of a dark tattoo on his chest. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly, standing up. "I shouldn't have touched it." "This house is meant to be lived in, Clara," Leo said, walking into the room. He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter on a side table. "Sit down. Play." Clara hesitated. Her heart was racing. Being alone with him always felt like standing too close to a fire. Warm, but inherently destructive. She sat back down, but kept her hands in her lap. "Are we going to be stuck here forever?" Leo took a sip of his drink, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Silvio tracked down a lead on Thomas today." Clara's breath hitched. "And?" "He was spotted in Providence, meeting with a fence who deals in stolen documents," Leo said, walking slowly toward the piano. He leaned against the polished black wood, towering over her. "He's trying to sell the ledger, Clara, The problem is, he didn't have it on him. I told you, I don't know where it is, Clara insisted, her voice trembling slightly under his intense gaze. I believe you, Leo said softly. The sudden gentleness in his tone threw her off balance. My men searched your apartment. It was tossed. The Romanos got there first, but they didn't find it either. Leo reached out, his hand hovering over the piano keys near her hands. He pressed a single white key. A clear note rang out. Thomas is a coward, but he's a cunning coward, Leo murmured, looking down at her. He wouldn't carry his only insurance policy on him. He hid it. And he hid it somewhere only he would know to look. We shared nothing, Clara said bitterly. He hated me by the end. But he loved Oliver, Leo pointed out. He sold Oliver, Clara snapped, anger briefly overcoming her fear. Yes, Leo agreed. Because he was desperate. But before he became desperate, where did he keep his secrets? Clara shook her head, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. I don't know. A lockbox? A storage unit? We checked them all, Leo said. He leaned closer, his scent of bergamot and danger enveloping her. Think, Clara. A book, a flash drive. Anything he might have slipped into your belongings before he left? Clara closed her eyes, trying to force her exhausted mind to remember the frantic months before Thomas had moved out. The arguments, the late nights, the times she caught him rummaging through. Her eyes snapped open. The blood drained from her face as a memory hit her like a physical blow. Leo saw the shift instantly. His posture straightened, a predatory focus returning to his eyes. What is it? Oliver's stuffed bear, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. For his 4th birthday, Thomas bought him this large, ugly stuffed bear. Oliver hated it, so I put it in the bottom of his toy trunk. But a week before Thomas left, I saw him restitching the back of it. He said it tore. Leo stared at her, the silence stretching between them, thick with sudden, dangerous implication. Where is the bear now? Leo asked, his voice deadly quiet. In Oliver's toy trunk, Clara stammered. In the apartment. The apartment that had been tossed by the Romanos. Leo pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing a number before the device even reached his ear. Silvio, get a team together. Now. We are going back to Mitchell's apartment. As Leo turned to leave, the heavy oak doors of the music room suddenly burst open. A guard, bleeding profusely from a cut above his eye, stumbled into the room, his radio crackling wildly with static and shouting. Boss! The guard gasped, clutching his side. The perimeter is breached. It's the Romanos. They bypassed the north gate. They're heavily armed, and they're inside the house. Leo's phone clattered to the floor. The ambient tranquility of the mansion was instantly shattered by the deafening, staccato roar of automatic gunfire erupting from the grand foyer down the hall. The war had just come to their front door. The deafening chatter of a Heckler & Koch submachine gun tore through the opulent silence of the western estate. The grand chandelier in the foyer, a cascade of bohemian crystal, shattered under a hail of stray bullets, raining razor-sharp glass onto the imported marble floors. Leo didn't flinch. In a fraction of a second, the urbane, brooding billionaire vanished, replaced by the apex predator who had clawed his way to the top of the New England underworld. He lunged across the music room, grabbing Clara by the waist and dragging her hard to the floor, just as a spray of bullets chewed through the mahogany doorframe, showering them in wood splinters. Oliver! Clara screamed, fighting frantically against Leo's iron grip. He's in the east wing. Leo, my baby! Stay down! Leo roared over the din of the gunfire. He reached beneath the polished soundboard of the Steinway piano, his hand closing around a hidden magnetic holster. He pulled free a customized Sig Sauer P226, racking the slide with a sharp, metallic clack that cut through the chaos. "I have to get him!" Clara sobbed, scrambling on her hands and knees toward the door. Leo grabbed her ankle, pulling her back with effortless strength. He pinned her beneath him, shielding her body with his own. "If you run out into that hallway, you will die. Do you understand me? Sal Romano's hitmen do not leave witnesses. I will get your son. You stay behind the piano." Before Clara could argue, the radio, clipped to the bleeding guard's belt, squawked. "Boss, it's a coordinated breach. 3 blacked-out Suburbans crashed the north gate. We count at least 15 shooters, heavily armed. They're pushing toward the main staircase." "Silvio," Leo barked into his own comms piece. "Status of the East Wing?" Static hissed. "Holding the corridor, Leo. They're trying to flank us through the conservatory. We need to fall back to the panic room." "Get the boy," Leo commanded, his eyes cold and unyielding. "If a single scratch lands on that child, Silvio, I will put a bullet in your head myself. Move to the extraction point, the garage. Now." Leo grabbed Clara's arm, hauling her to her feet. The smell of cordite and copper was thick in the air, choking the lungs. "We are moving. Keep your head down. Do not look at the bodies, and do not stop moving." He kicked open the side door of the music room, leading them into the dimly lit servants' corridor. The noise of the firefight was muffled here, but the structural vibrations of the house told a grim story. The Moretti Syndicate was fighting a desperate defensive battle. As they rounded a corner toward the kitchen, 2 men in black tactical gear and ski masks burst through the pantry doors. They weren't Leo's men. Time seemed to dilate. Clara froze, a scream trapped in her throat as the lead gunman raised a sawed-off Remington shotgun. Leo didn't hesitate. He pushed Clara violently against the wall, stepping directly into the line of fire. His Sig Sauer barked twice in rapid succession. Crack, crack. The first round caught the lead gunman in the throat. The second took the man behind him squarely between the eyes. Both men crumpled to the tiled floor in a heap of tangled limbs and blooming crimson. Clara clamped her hands over her mouth, her entire body shaking violently. She had known Leo was a monster, but witnessing the cold, mechanical efficiency with which he ended human lives was entirely different. He didn't even look at the bodies as he stepped over them, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. "Keep moving, Clara," he ordered, his voice devoid of any emotion. They reached the subterranean garage, a sprawling concrete cavern housing Leo's collection of luxury and armored vehicles. Silvio was already there, taking cover behind a matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, and huddled behind him, crying but miraculously unharmed, was Oliver. "Ollie!" Clara broke away from Leo, sprinting across the concrete and falling to her knees to crush her son against her chest. "Oh, thank God, thank God!" Oliver buried his face in her cashmere sweater, his small hands gripping her tight. "Mummy, it's so loud." "I know, baby, I know. We're leaving now," she promised, kissing the top of his head repeatedly. Silvio reloaded his weapon, his face grim. "They're swarming the ground floor, boss. The local police have been paid to look the other way for 20 minutes, but we can't hold this perimeter forever. The estate is lost." Leo stared at the heavy steel roll-up door at the far end of the garage. To lose his home was a massive blow to his pride, an insult that demanded a river of blood in return. But as he looked at Clara rocking her terrified child, the cold, calculating syndicate boss felt something shift in his chest. The ledger mattered. His empire mattered. But right now, ensuring the 2 of them survived mattered more. "Load them into the armored Audi," Leo ordered. "You drive. We are going to Boston." Silvio stared at him, bewildered. "Boston?" Boss, it's a war zone out there. The Romanos will be watching every safe house. We aren't going to a safe house, Leo said, checking his magazine. We're going to Mitchell's apartment. The Romanos already tossed it. They won't expect us to walk right back into the graveyard. We need that ledger tonight, Silvio, before Sal realizes what he's actually looking for. They piled into the heavily fortified Audi RS6 Avant. As the garage doors opened, Silvio gunned the engine, tearing out into the torrential rain. The tires gripped the wet asphalt, accelerating brutally as they crashed through the compromised front gates, leaving the burning, bullet-riddled western estate behind them in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, Clara held Oliver tight. Leo sat beside her, his gun resting on his knee. He reached out in the darkness, his large, scarred hand gently covering hers. It was a silent promise. They were in the eye of the storm, but the worst was yet to come. The drive back to the North End was a masterclass in evasion. Silvio took a labyrinth of back roads, switching license plates electronically at a red light and completely bypassing the main highways. Boston was shrouded in a heavy, miserable fog, the relentless rain washing the neon reflections into a blurry, bruised watercolor. They parked 3 blocks away from Clara's apartment building, leaving the Audi hidden in a narrow, trash-strewn alley. The neighborhood was dead quiet, the kind of heavy silence that usually preceded violence in Leo's world. "Carry the boy," Leo instructed Clara quietly. "Silvio, take the rear. If you see anyone who doesn't belong, drop them." Clara hoisted a sleeping Oliver into her arms. The weight of him grounded her, but her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They moved swiftly through the shadows, avoiding the glare of the streetlights. When they reached the dilapidated brick building where Clara had lived in quiet desperation for 2 years, the front security door hung off its hinges, the locking mechanism completely blown out. "The Romanos lack subtlety," Leo murmured, his jaw tight. They ascended the narrow, creaking stairs to the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. The door was ajar, the cheap wood splintered around the deadbolt. Leo stepped in first, leading with his weapon. The apartment was completely unrecognizable. Every piece of furniture had been gutted. The couch cushions were sliced open, their stuffing resembling dirty snow scattered across the cheap linoleum floor. The television was smashed, the kitchen cabinets ripped from their hinges, and the drywall had been punched through in a dozen places in search of hidden compartments. Clara gasped, stepping inside. The violation of her meager, private sanctuary felt like a physical assault. They destroyed everything. "Where is the trunk, Clara?" Leo asked softly, keeping his eyes on the dark corners of the apartment. "In Oliver's room." She pointed down the short, narrow hallway. They moved into the small bedroom. It had received the same brutal treatment. The mattress was gutted, the small dresser overturned, but in the corner, miraculously overlooked or deemed too childish to contain mob secrets, sat a battered wooden toy trunk covered in faded cartoon stickers. Clara set Oliver down gently on the ruined bed. He stirred but didn't wake. She dropped to her knees in front of the trunk, her hands shaking as she threw open the lid. She frantically dug through a pile of broken plastic cars, coloring books, and wooden blocks. At the very bottom, shoved against the corner, was the bear. It was a monstrosity of cheap carnival plush, standing nearly 2 feet tall, with matted brown fur and one uneven glass eye. It looked pathetic, abandoned. Clara pulled it out, feeling the weight of it. "Is that it?" Silvio asked, stepping into the doorway, his gun sweeping the hallway. Leo knelt beside Clara, taking the bear from her hands. He flipped it over. Running down the center of the bear's back was a thick, crude line of black thread, drastically different from the factory stitching. Leo pulled a sleek, Damascus steel folding knife from his pocket. With a swift, precise motion, he sliced the thread. The back of the bear parted. Clara held her breath. Leo reached his fingers into the cheap polyester stuffing and pulled out a small, tightly wrapped package wrapped in black electrical tape. He peeled the tape back to reveal a thick, leather-bound notebook and a secure, encrypted USB drive. "The ledger," Leo breathed, a grim smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Mitchell, you stupid, brilliant rat." "So it's over?" Clara asked, her voice trembling with a sudden surge of adrenaline and relief. "You have what you want. We can go?" Click. The unmistakable, sharp sound of a hammer being pulled back on a revolver echoed through the small bedroom. Leo froze, his body shielding Clara. Silvio instantly spun around, raising his weapon, but he stopped dead. Standing in the doorway of the bedroom, drenched in rain, pale and shivering violently, was Thomas Mitchell. Thomas looked like a walking corpse. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and sunken into dark, bruised sockets. He held a cheap, snub-nosed .38 revolver, and the barrel was pointed directly at Silvio's chest. "Drop it, Silvio," Thomas rasped, his voice cracking, "or I blow a hole through you. Drop the gun." Silvio glanced at Leo. Leo gave a microscopic nod. Slowly, Silvio lowered his weapon to the floor and kicked it away. "Thomas!" Clara gasped, horror washing over her. "What are you doing?" Thomas's manic eyes snapped to Clara, then to the sleeping form of Oliver on the bed. A flicker of something ugly, resentment, guilt, fear passed over his face. "I had to come back," he muttered, his hand shaking so badly the gun bobbed up and down. "The Romanos. They double-crossed me. I gave them the address, but they didn't pay. They tried to kill me. I need the ledger. It's my only way out. Sal Romano will pay millions for it now that he knows Moretti is bleeding." "You sold us to them," Clara said, her voice rising, thick with a venom she didn't know she possessed. "You sold your own son to monsters for a gambling debt." "He was collateral," Thomas screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I was going to come back for you. But I need that book, Leo. Hand it over, toss it to me, or I swear to God I'll start shooting." Leo rose to his feet slowly, deliberately, his imposing frame blocking Clara entirely. He held the small, black-taped package in his left hand. His right hand hung loosely by his side, deceptively relaxed. "You are out of your depth, Thomas," Leo said, his voice a low, terrifying purr. "You are a small-time grifter who tried to play God with my money. You have a gun, but you lack the stomach to use it. If you pull that trigger, you might hit Silvio. But before the hammer falls a second time, I will dismantle you piece by piece." "Don't test me," Thomas shrieked, aiming the gun at Leo. "Toss the ledger." "You want it?" Leo asked, his eyes dark voids of absolute menace. "You want the book that tore your family apart?" Leo tossed the leather-bound book through the air. Thomas, driven by sheer, desperate greed, instinctively reached out his left hand to catch it, his eyes tracking the object for a fraction of a millisecond. That was all Leo needed. With blinding speed, Leo's right hand whipped up. The Sig Sauer materialized from his side. He didn't even aim. He fired on pure, honed instinct. Bang! The gunshot in the confined space of the bedroom was deafening. Clara screamed, covering her ears and throwing her body over Oliver to protect him from the sound and the violence. Thomas let out a high-pitched, gargling shriek. The ledger hit the floor, untouched. Thomas's gun clattered to the linoleum. He stumbled backward, clutching his right shoulder. Blood poured through his fingers, staining his cheap, wet jacket, a dark, glistening crimson. The bullet had shattered his clavicle, rendering his shooting arm useless. Silvio was instantly on him, kicking Thomas's legs out from under him and driving a knee into his back, pinning the screaming man to the floor. Leo stood motionless, the smoke curling lazily from the barrel of his gun. He looked down at the pathetic, writhing man who had caused so much suffering. "You let him live," Silvio grunted, slightly surprised, applying pressure to Thomas's back. Leo turned his back on Thomas and looked down at Clara. She was trembling, her wide, terrified eyes locked onto him. He slowly holstered his weapon, the violence completely draining from his posture. He knelt beside her, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. "I don't kill in front of children unless I have to," Leo said softly, his gaze dropping to Oliver, who was just beginning to stir, mercifully having slept through the worst of it. Leo looked back into Clara's eyes, an undeniable fierce possessiveness settling deep in his chest. "And I don't make widows out of women who belong to me." Clara's breath hitched. "Belong to me." The words were a heavy, velvet chain, securing her to the most dangerous man in the city. Suddenly, Silvio's radio crackled with a frantic, static-laced transmission from the men left on the perimeter. "Boss! Boss, do you copy? It's a trap. The Romanos didn't leave. They used Mitchell as bait. Sal Romano is here, and he's got 30 men surrounding the building. We are completely cut off." Leo's head snapped up, his dark eyes hardening into obsidian. The trap had sprung, and the true war for survival had just begun. The walls of the dilapidated apartment vibrated as the unmistakable thunder of heavy boots pounded up the central wooden stairwell. 30 men, armed to the teeth and hungry for the bounty Sal Romano had placed on Leo Moretti's head, were swarming the building. Leo didn't waste a millisecond on panic. He shoved the black-taped ledger into the inner pocket of his ruined suit jacket. "Silvio, barricade the door. Use the dresser, the bed frame, everything." Silvio moved with brutal efficiency, dragging the heavy, splintered furniture across the linoleum to block the only entrance. Outside in the hallway, the first wave of Romano hitmen reached the landing. The barrage of gunfire was immediate. Bullets shredded the cheap drywall, turning the apartment into a cloud of choking white plaster dust. Clara was on the floor, her body curled entirely over Oliver, her hands covering his ears. Thomas was writhing in the corner, clutching his shattered shoulder, whimpering pathetically as the reality of his impending death finally eclipsed his greed. "We can't hold this room, boss!" Silvio shouted over the deafening roar of automatic weapons. The makeshift barricade was already buckling under the physical weight of men ramming against it. "We aren't holding it," Leo growled. He strode across the bedroom to the small, rain-streaked window overlooking the alleyway. He smashed the glass with the butt of his Sig Sauer, the jagged shards tumbling into the darkness below. Outside, the rusted iron of the fire escape offered a treacherous, slippery path upward. In the north end, the historic brick tenement buildings were famously packed shoulder to shoulder, their flat tar paper roofs separated by mere feet. It was an architectural nightmare for the city's fire department, but tonight it was their only viable exit strategy. "Silvio, you take the boy," Leo commanded, grabbing Clara by the arm and hauling her to her feet. "Clara, you climb. Do not look down. Do not stop until you hit the roof. Go!" Clara didn't hesitate. Adrenaline, pure and blinding, overrode her exhaustion. She scrambled out the broken window, the freezing rain instantly soaking her to the bone. She gripped the rusted iron railings, her hands tearing on the rough metal, and pulled herself up the steep stairs. Silvio followed immediately, holding a terrified Oliver against his chest with one arm, while keeping his weapon trained downward with the other. Leo was the last to step out onto the fire escape. Just as his boots hit the iron grating, the bedroom door gave way with a sickening crack. 5 Romano enforcers spilled into the room, tripping over Thomas's bleeding body. Leo didn't run. He turned, leaning casually into the window frame, and unleashed a barrage of suppressing fire. The deafening cracks of his pistol dropped the first two men instantly, their bodies tangling in the doorway and creating a gruesome bottleneck. "Moretti!" Sal Romano's raspy, cigar-ruined voice echoed up from the alleyway below. Clara glanced down, her stomach dropping. 4 black SUVs blocked the narrow street. Sal, a stout, ruthless man in a dripping trench coat, stood behind an open car door, aiming a customized Benelli M4 shotgun directly up at them. "You're dead, Leo! I'm taking the city and I'm taking the book! You're taking nothing but a pine box, Sal!" Leo roared back. A shotgun blast shattered the brickwork inches from Leo's head. He ducked, holstered his weapon, and sprinted up the fire escape, taking the iron steps 2 at a time. He reached the roof just as Silvio kicked open the low parapet wall. "Jump!" Leo ordered Clara. The gap between their building and the adjacent bakery's roof was only 4 feet, but 4 feet in the pitch-black, freezing rain, suspended 3 stories above the unforgiving asphalt, felt like the Grand Canyon. Clara looked at the yawning, black abyss. Fear paralyzed her. "Clara, look at me." Leo's voice cut through the storm, instantly anchoring her. He was standing on the ledge, his dark eyes burning with an intense, unwavering certainty. "I will not let you fall. Jump!" She squeezed her eyes shut and leapt. Strong, scarred hands caught her waist mid-air, absorbing her momentum and pulling her safely onto the neighboring roof. Silvio landed heavily beside them a second later, Oliver still tucked safely against his chest. They ran. They traversed 3 more rooftops, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoing furiously behind them. By the time they reached the roof of a commercial textile warehouse at the end of the block, the sirens had finally begun to wail. It wasn't the distant, lazy wail of a passing patrol. It was the synchronized, deafening scream of a massive police response. Leo stopped, leaning against a heavy HVAC unit, his chest heaving as he pulled out his encrypted satellite phone. He dialed a single digit. "Captain O'Malley," Leo said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the chaos. "I'm sending you coordinates in the north end. Sal Romano and 30 of his unlicensed dogs are shooting up a residential block. I want them arrested, or I want them put in body bags. Do this, and the pension fund I set up in your wife's name gets doubled." Leo hung up. He looked at Clara, who was leaning against the brick wall, shivering violently, her arms wrapped tightly around her son. The battle for Boston was over. Leo had won. 3 weeks later, the Boston skyline gleamed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Four Seasons penthouse. The bloody siege was over. Thomas Mitchell, having survived his gunshot wound, was now facing 20 years in federal lockup, courtesy of evidence Leo had quietly handed to a compromised police captain. Sal Romano was dead, neutralized by a police sniper in the alleyway, allowing the Moretti syndicate to swallow his remaining territories overnight. Clara stood bathed in the morning light, wearing a tailored emerald green silk dress. In the adjoining room, Oliver was safely building a towering Lego fortress under the surprisingly patient watch of Silvio. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Leo strode in, shedding his charcoal suit jacket. The ruthless syndicate boss looked exhausted, but victorious. He crossed the room, stopping inches from Clara, his large, scarred hand gently tracing her jawline. "The passports are ready," Leo murmured, his voice a gravelly rumble. "New identities, untraceable accounts. A private jet is idling at Logan right now. You and Oliver can disappear to Europe today. You will never have to look over your shoulder again." Clara looked up into his dark, imposing eyes. A month ago, she would have sprinted toward that jet. but the fires of that rainy night had forged something unbreakable between them. She had seen the monster he was to the world and the protector he was for her son. "And what if I don't want to run?" she asked, stepping closer, her hands resting flat against his chest. Leo's breath hitched. "My world is a violent one, Clara. You stay, and you step onto a dangerous throne." "I was already a target," Clara replied fiercely, "but now I have the devil himself to protect me." Leo pulled her flush against him, capturing her lips in a bruising, possessive kiss. She was no longer a victim. She was the undisputed queen of his empire. What an incredible journey. From a desperate mother running through the freezing rain to the undisputed queen of a criminal empire, Clara and Leo's story proves that sometimes the most beautiful romances are born in the darkest of places. The explosive clash with the Romano family, the ultimate betrayal by Thomas, and that heart-stopping rooftop escape kept us on the edge of our seats. If you loved this intense, twist-filled Mafia romance drama and want to hear more thrilling, action-packed stories, be sure to hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends who love a good enemies to lovers or protective mafia boss storyline, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next high-stakes, real-life story. Let us know in the comments below. Would you have taken the passports or stayed with Leo?